How do you get this StreamYard thing? This is fancy.
Hey, I mean, this is my first time running the show, so
Bam! Amazing. I am honored, Matt. I am honored. My goodness.
You honor me, sir.
Oh, it's a delight. My goodness.
All right. Hello and welcome to the first, and who knows, maybe the last edition of Skank Stacks, where we talk about literature, pulling books off of the bookshelves. We have just published a week ago our second edition of this little zine. And I invited our friend Daniel from OG Rose to be one of our first surrogate readers to give us his reactions to the stories, the prompt itself, all of that good stuff. And one of the reasons I was particularly excited to reach out to Daniel is because he has some experience as a creative writing teacher, and as well as writing his own short stories and stories. I was this close to actually biting the bullet and joining your most recent story cohort, but timing and cost and stuff like that at the time, and I'm just like, I need to actually do the thing I committed to do, and then use that, and who knows, maybe down the line I'll use that as an excuse to learn directly from you. But please tell us a little bit about your creative writing experience, brother.
Well, you are very kind. Well, I am honored to be here for Shank Stacks. So that's a fantastic name in discussion of books. I was beginning to listen to, I must admit, Taxes Are Due, and I'm having that moment of going, oh, I really can't put this off. But I was listening to the last live you had where you were speaking with all those fine gentlemen about the work, and you were making a point to sort of stress a belief in literature, belief in the written word, the belief in this kind of work. I personally take fiction very seriously. I think fiction is extremely serious work. I think basically a people live or die by their fiction. I think the fate of a nation, of a people, of the spirit is strongly tied to literature. Because there's something, we often, of course, there's discussion about the importance of story. But what is the difference, of course, between story and literature? In the written word, in the reading of the book, there's sometimes, I think, people can treat story as interchangeable. Like the story that is from the movie is just as good as from the book, et cetera, so forth. And we kind of make the mediums fungible in a sense, like interchangeable, right? Mm-hmm. First off, I think that's a major problem, because whatever medium you pick, you need to also think about the kinds of story that medium can tell that can be told in no other medium. And that's extremely important, because if a story is fungible in terms of medium, then it's actually not making the most of itself or the medium and opening new possibilities that can happen. One of these stories, I think it's the Horse of Heaven, I'll make an example. You do the font on the pages like this, and you have the upload that's going on, and it makes me think a bit of Barthman's Snow White sort of works as well that's coming forward. And there's a sense of kind of something is kind of uploading and it's moving, and the reading experience here is very unique and enjoyable, right? You could not imagine this done in this way in a movie as a medium, right? And so the point I'm getting at ultimately is that the medium we work in really, really matters. And I think basically literature that works, this sounds very lofty. Literature that works is almost like a miracle. It's like a miracle. Because the reason why it's a miracle is because what you're doing somehow is taking black marks on paper and emotionally moving and transforming someone. Well, how did you do that exactly? Now, if I'm watching a movie and there's the aesthetics are beautiful, the music swells up, the characters are moving. I'm not saying that any old movie can do that willy-nilly, but it's almost like, oh, of course you were moved because the music came in and the scenes, you could see everything. Marshall McLuhan talks about the difference between a cold and a hot medium. I used to get those confused. A cold medium.
I still bounce back and forth between them.
And then I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and go, dang it, I told that waiter at Hardee's wrong. Oh no, shoot. And then I'm going back and I'm like, look, and I got sausage. Hey, I was the sausage gravy guy. I got it backwards. I'm so sorry. And the idea that TV is a hot medium. A cold medium. See, I just did it because you're not actively having to think. Your brain can kind of turn on, right?
Yep.
Where
it's doing the work for you.
It's doing the work for you. Whereas a hot medium is like the written word because you have to do the work, right? I think basically if literature is, it is extremely difficult to have literature that has that impact and moves people emotionally. But because it's a hot medium, if it succeeds, it uniquely impacts and transforms people and shapes subjectivity. But it's stupidly hard. And in fact, now, of course, I'm biased because I do it, but, I think it is stupidly hard. One of the reasons I think there can be this kind of making story fungible and not really thinking about the medium is because we almost subconsciously want to act as if the cold mediums are just as good as the hot mediums, that there is not an impact on the story or to our subjectivity based on that. But actually, I think very much there is, because I think when we overly use cold mediums, our ability to apprehend, our ability to listen, our ability to pay attention, our ability to find ourselves walking through the woods and suddenly daydream a story, all of those, I think, become far less. So the first thing I guess I just want to say is I salute you for defending the medium, because I think doing work in this form is very hard, and making it work is like a miracle, but it's actually really important to do it. I think the practice of doing it changes you in important ways. I think giving it to people to read is impactful in important ways. So I salute you for that. And I suppose I'll just say that O.G. Rose started with creative writing and fiction. I started a science fiction series when I was 10, The Sword of Tribulation, worked on that for 8 years every morning, walked in the woods, came up with stories. We did literary fiction for a long time. We wrote 3 novels, To Turn the World, Blackout, all of which have to be rewritten after the revelation of Robert Olin Butler, who smacked me in the face. We've written hundreds of, I think about 60 short stories. We just released Under the Wing, which I would say is completely done and has gone through the crucible of rewriting needed to bring it up to the standard it needs to be. There's Turn the World, Blackout, and the extremely long novel Digressions that has to be worked through. So that's really where O.G. Rose starts. It's just extremely important. So that's how I would open.
Well, thank you very much. That's an opening and a half, and then 2 more openings, but they were wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
Trying to figure out where to go from here, because I almost want to jump into just talking about things like just even the way like hearing you describe like the editing process. It just feels like a very like mortifying, sort of like unselfing. It's one of those where like when your art becomes like not just a thing you do, but like soul craft, where it really like it's a real like I don't know, like confrontation with your own self, and you have to. I mean, that was one of the things that I experienced, is that like I mentioned earlier, when I like the first time I sent my story off to get some like proof marks from my sister, and part of the reason like I realized I needed to do that, and really it was just like even just sending it to another pair of eyes, because at that point in time I'm like, I just can't see this anymore.
Correct.
Like it's so like I know everything I am trying to do, and I can't help but see everything in light of what I am trying to do with my story, and so I am just, it's impossible for me to judge how successful or unsuccessful this is.
Yeah, there's this interesting sort of tension in writing where it becomes very hard to see, and it becomes invisible. And you're looking for people to read it in order to see what you can't see. And one, I think that's a very important experience to have in your life, to actually have that level of helplessness. Because that feeling of helplessness where you don't know what you need to do, even if you want to know what to do, that's actually like one of the great truths of, well, I think philosophy actually. Like when philosophy's at its best, and theology, it brings you to this realization. I like to talk about global pluralism and internally consistent systems. Well, the idea of internally consistent systems is strongly tied to that phenomenology of trying to write something, because you get to this place where you can't see it. Even if you want to, you literally need the other person, right? Otherwise, you can't know what you don't know. So I think that experience in writing actually is extremely important to bring to all lived experience, where you need the other to help you rewrite. It's in the same way, like you need the other to help you rethink, to help you re-see, and everything like that. That's an extremely important experience. I'm happy to say more, but I'll throw it back to you before.
I had a suspicion that some of your discussions about like social coordination might come into our talk today. Because this is a zine, so this was collaborative, and we're in the process of asking like, what should we do next? And so it is like very much like trying to coordinate with the things that the guys that are on my crew kind of care about, as well as trying to figure out what's the sort of thing that an audience might be receptive to. Right. And I think I don't know. It's still early in the production, but I think we might have gone a little bit too far into the absurdity with the Cyberpunk Islam as an opener.
Well,
It's
as a few
it's a
things.
tough pill to swallow.
Well, first off, so as just kind of broad overviews, and I'm sure we'll weave out of discussing the work and overarching ideas, et cetera, so forth. I think first off, cyberpunk is actually a wonderful, I want to say genre or world to pick because I think it's actually perfect. If this is this little Zine, this little corner, I think the cyberpunk actually captures a lot of the tensions of what this little corner is concerned about. And so it's, cyberpunk, I suppose, I'm not sure if it's birthed in Japan. Certainly a lot of Japanese works, generally speaking, for anyone interested in storytelling, Japan, who wants to deal with the real tensions that I think people are dealing with now, that people refer to as the meaning crisis or the meta crisis. Generally speaking, Japan is a good place to look for ideas because Japan modernized without religion quickest. What ended up happening is they accelerate. Daniel Zaruba is very good on this subject, which is to say that Japan, they began modernizing later than the West, but they did it without religion sooner. So you can actually see where the West is going in Japan before we get there because of that modernization. So, for example, you had cyberpunk, you had Ghost in the Shell, you had Akira, you had body horror sort of ideas, you've had stories about falling in love with robots, you've had environmental issues. They've been telling these stories for a really long time. And they've also been telling, whether it be Sitsi Cone and Tokyo Godfathers. I know I saw a Cowboy Bebop reference. That made me really happy. But, the Paranoia Agent, Perfect Blue, these works of psychological and existential terror, those are things that the Japanese have been dealing with for a long time. Or Welcome to the NHAK, Hikimoriism. More and more people in the West are dealing with Hikimoriism. So there's a lot that's going on there that can actually be a place to look for the creator that's trying to kind of try to determine what sort of genre or what kind of story they should tell now in the West that might resonate with people, because a lot of people are in that meaning crisis. So I think cyberpunk to start is very interesting, but I like the idea of cyberpunk Islam because when I see cyberpunk, I'm expecting Blade Runner. I'm expecting a Ghost in the Shell ripoff that hopes people don't watch anime. I'm expecting, these sort of works. And so when you're tying it together with Islam, and I think also what's very interesting is that Islam is uniquely civilizational, as I understand it. Now, I am no expert. The great Thomas Jockin would be far better on me, but Christianity has a tendency, and I suppose a lot of, what we talk about in the TLC is how this has been problematic, but there's can be a tendency in Christianity to basically be like saved by grace, all things are made by God. So there's not really this tension to figure out how to make a Christian civilization, because basically it's God's incarnational. So you can just figure out a way that whatever civilization arises is nevertheless Christian, right? But in Islam, the future has to be really, really wrestled with and thought out and negotiated in terms of how it's going to work with the understandings we have in the Quran, right? So I think cyberpunk Islam is a very interesting sort of thing to describe because it's going to bring to the surface civilizational questions we have to ask in the context of how do we do it in a manner where we don't lose our souls at the same time, which that's, I think, a lot of the battle today, a lot of the thought, but I'll pause.
And especially and this is where I come up against my limits of even like knowledge about Islam. You have to ask questions like what is the Islamic anthropology as far as even their kind of like conception of like the soul, the inner life, the distinction between inner and outer.
Yes.
Because again, like I think from the vantage point of most of, again, my non-Islamic collaborators is we see from our vantage point outside of the thing looking in that it seems to be something that places more of an emphasis on like ritual obeisance than anything you might see in most branches of American Christianity. And so it is more attentive to like the fact that there is potential for more of a divide between inner and outer.
No, and I think when you get into questions, I think one of the stories was talking about selling the body, genetic engineering, the inner, outer, the VR. Those kind of questions become very, very pronounced on the division between the body and what kind of world you can occupy virtually. Those become very real tensions in the cyberpunk world. No, I mean for me, it's funny that you're doing on cyberpunk because a work that Jochen and Luber and I have been working on has been trying to situate it in terms of the cyberpunk. I think, for me, what's always, I guess, just a kind of rule of thumb is that if a Christian is going to write, say, on Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism or something like that, or vice versa, if the Buddhist is going to write on Christianity or so on, a fairly good rule of thumb is to try to do it in such a way that if a Christian were to read your work on Islam, they would feel like they've never thought about Islam before, that it's new to them. Like you've worked it in such a way where suddenly Islam is a world that they didn't know about, right? Because often I think Christians will write about Islam in a way to confirm Christian Islam to Christians, right? Whereas there's a kind of, for me, an imperative to work as hard as you possibly can to make it to where if a Christian read the work that you've done on Islam, they would feel like Islam was entirely new to them. And that pressure you put on yourself forces you to do a lot of research. It forces you to think deeper. It forces you to question your preconceptions. And thus it becomes a true research project for yourself as you're trying to craft that story. And I think that's also a work, I would associate that with the girdle point. And also it's an act of trying to make space for the other in important ways. There's a line also that I always, there's a short story teacher, a creative writer, Charles Glicksberg. It's an old book from like 62 or something. But there's a lovely line in it that I always followed, which is if you have a character that, if you have a character ever express ideas, like voice a monologue or something, make sure you don't believe a word of it. And if you have a character that has beliefs like yours, make that the character who's messing up, or make that the bad guy, right? And the reason is because you're always making a tension with yourself to check yourself. And also you're more likely to humanize the character versus make them unintentionally a vehicle for propaganda or something like that. So those are some thoughts.
That's like, again, going back to like the editing and the unselfing bit there, the part that like, if you work with a thing long enough, you like the division between you and the work becomes really, really blurry, and you can't see it as something other than an extension of yourself. So like a tactic for combating that is putting that in the eyes of somebody who you don't want to identify with in the story. It's
huge. So one of your great, I may every now and then speak large picture and move, et cetera, so forth. As I sit out in the garage, taking me back to childhood here, Matt, because I just lived in my garage. So it's great. Now that we have this like extension where you can do calls in the garage, it's just like magic. It's just magic. But anyway, you were mentioning how there's this great problem where one's work seems to naturally become invisible to them, where it becomes very difficult to see. And so therefore you ultimately need the other. So there are many ways you can introduce the other into your process, and you want to make as many others as you can into your process. So as an example, if you make the character that, is speaking different from you, or the one you agree the bad guy or something, that creates otherness in your work and helps it be visible and helps yourself be a better judge of it, right? Because you're creating that tension there. Right? If a character voices ideas and really makes it seem, and it's written in such a way that the author, the reader, may actually think they're your ideas, that creates a tension in yourself, right? So you're doing this work to create all of these tensions, to fight as much as you can the tendency of the work becoming invisible to you. And there's many different ways to do that, but as an overarching point, that's so important, so important.
Just thinking how little of this I did, part because I like that these are tactics that are going against your natural instincts there.
Yes.
And also that sounds like probably like step 2 or 3 after just getting a decent amount of like volume down on paper.
Yes. So that, one thing that needs to be said. So first off, I think the story, characters, I'll even say vibe and world building of the work is lovely. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed being in that space. I do personally love the cyberpunk genre. Just, I really enjoy that. It's very clear that all of the contributors are creative. They have vivid imaginations. They're able to envision things. They're able to come up. They have no trouble coming up with new scenarios, right? Like, so what a lot of times, people in literary fiction, and of course there are differences between genre fiction, literary fiction, and so on and so forth. A lot of people in literary fiction may not be that good at creating an entire world, or inventing or coming up with new inventions that add to the vibe of the experience, or and I don't want to be flicking around papers so much, but on just kind of the holographic imagery, walking in the girl that changes the from blonde to brunette, all of that kind of working, you kind of feel the vibe, right? And how that's very creative. So that's all extremely well done. And so I think in your first draft of a work, just in general, you really do want to not think too hard. In a sense, you want to get it out. You want to get the world out. You want to get the story out. I've had experience like Blackout, the novel. The idea of that I had at 11:40 p.m. at night after work at the wholesale. I proceeded to grab a notebook and write the entire kind of structure of the story until about 3 a.m, just in a bliss, and wouldn't put the pen down until it was all out, because then it was there, right? And then on the first draft, you just write. You write, you make the character, and you go from there. I think what's the phrase that you'll sometimes hear is that writing is rewriting. Like the rewriting is just as much the writing as the first draft in the first writing, and each phase of the writing has a different approach to it, right? Like for example, when you're getting the story, and I'll throw it back to you, if you're getting the story out and you're focusing way too much on the sentence structure, too much on all of the details, then you can be in trouble because you get bogged down, right? But then in the rewriting, if you're not focusing on the details of the sentence structure, you may write in such a manner that hinders the ability of the reader to have an emotional experience of your work, because they can never enter it. They can never get into it, right? And that starts to allude to what I think is the ultimate ultra challenge of fiction writing that I don't think is discussed enough. I think it is what makes fiction writing what it is and distinct from nonfiction writing. And it is insanely difficult, but if it is done correctly, I think it really moves people. And I know I'm alluding to a lot, and I'm gesturing to Robert Olin Butler, but certainly there is great importance to make sure in your first draft that you just get it out, because to give yourself permission to just get it out, because if you don't do that, you won't get it out, and then it will just die, right? Your first draft, your first work is making the giant block of marble, and the rewriting is the chiseling. So the first, you need to make the block of marble, or there's nothing to chisel, but the rewriting is the chiseling more than actually the first draft is what I'm suggesting. So you make that block and then you chisel it, but I'll pause.
So I think I'll probably bracket us and move on to something else soon. But just one other question on like the first drafting, because do you also recommend that, like, you're not ready to, I guess, like write your first draft until the thing is kind of like ready to pop?
That's an excellent question.
I would say, just because, like, at least from my experience with the story that I wrote, it was like brainstorming, churning, just kind of like idea generation for about like 2 weeks, or like, I don't know what this is. And so I'm like, have like 6 different things that I'm like, I would like to write about one of these 6 things. And then after like day 4 or 5 of like showing up to a laptop that wasn't ready for me yet, I just sat there, and in the span of like 30 seconds, like 4 of those, what I thought were different stories, like edge their way into like a particular like formation. I'm like, oh, there it is. That's it. Like, and I just saw the story pop into place.
So I will give my opinion that I have found.
Your mileage may vary.
It may vary. I think what you want to do is basically live your life and use your time in such a manner where the probability of that apprehension is higher. And so Zwingli talks about insight, but let me give an example. And I love this example. I use it all the time. The FedEx sign? The FedEx sign, it has a little negative space arrow in it. Yep. You remember the first time you saw that, where just bam, then it was there and you couldn't unsee it? There was this moment where it wasn't there. You looked, and then suddenly, bam, there it was, right? Or let's take the duck bunny, and you didn't know it was the duck bunny, the famous Wittgenstein. And then suddenly you see both. Bam, there it is, right? Dolly paintings like The Musician or Old Couple. You see the musician, and then you suddenly see the old couple. So there's this moment where suddenly you see it, right? And then you can't unsee it. And then it's kind of a guiding principle. Like every time you see it, your eye just kind of goes to it, right? So I think you make the decision of what you're going to write based on your gathering and that Heideggerian, you're gathering. And so what you're doing is as you gather, the final image I'll make is at the end of Speak Memory. Nabokov talks about the find the sailor that's hidden. So you know those pictures that are these big pictures made of all these small pictures?
Oh, yeah.
And you take all these, and then eventually you step and you're walking around the room and then you see it. You see the sailor, right? Yeah. So what you want to do is you're gathering. You're reading books, you're taking notes, you have sticky notes, you're taking walks, you're gathering experiences, you're walking around, and it's like you're gathering all those little small images together. You're gathering and you're gathering. And then as you continue to do that, then what can happen is, boom, the apprehension occurs. And what I find when it all pops together, then that creates the motivation and the energy to do the thing, to do the writing, because it pushes you along. It creates this pull in the experience of it. So as another just kind of practical example, when I'm writing Turn the World, which I am sensing has a feeling of Faulkner and Southern Goth, then the only books I'm reading are Faulkner or Flannery O'Connor or Walker Percy. I'm not going to be reading, and McCarthy. I'm not going to be, as I'm reading that, reading David Foster Wallace. However, when I do digressions, I'm reading David Foster Wallace and Don DeLeo and different people, because I want to increase the probability that the things I am gathering up are small images in which a big image can be apprehended, right? Mm. And if it's too different, it's probably not going to, it's like adding something to one of those examples I made that throws it all off or something, right? So I believe in the apprehension moment. I believe in the gathering and then bam, as opposed to I have myself not found it very successful to will to write, like willpower. I'm gonna have willpower to write this story. I use my willpower to gather, to read, and then I'm creating an environment where the apprehension suddenly and all at once occurs. That's for me how I decide what I'm going to write.
I think you also just kind of highlighted, I don't know, what for me is sort of lingering, not criticism, but just like observation about like the particular media mode of TLC YouTube live streams. And we seem to be sort of like 80, 90% gathering all these little bits and pieces together, magpieing stuff. And that's as far as it goes, because epiphanies are addicting.
Sure. They absolutely. Well, the interesting thing is how to gather in a manner that increases the probability of the insight to create the directionality, right? So you have to be intentional on what you gather. The topics cannot be too random. Yep. So the whole zine is, so you've picked a topic, right? Cyberpunk Islam, and the world's going to be that. So you have to get, so what books, novels, stories have the highest probability of being gathered that if you apprehended something, it would be toward and under that genre, right? So, you mentioned cowboy, obviously Japanese work, obviously we're talking, I know y'all mentioned Ghost in the Shell and different things like that. I would not be, if I knew I was writing a story or working on work for Cyberpunk Islam, I'm not going to then have a conversation about William Faulkner, right? I'm not going to do that because that would be gathering, but it would be random. So a distinction has to be made between random and gathering, like aggregate, collecting, and gathering, right? That is not an easy thing to tell the difference, but there is a critical difference, because if you're simply collecting, let me use that language. If you're simply collecting versus gathering, the likelihood of an apprehension is low, right? You're not going to have that apprehension where you grasp a gestalt, as Wigley would say. But if you're gathering, then you grasp. But here's also a critical difference. And this is why fiction is a big deal. When you grasp the apprehension, you now have to work. You now have to go do something, as opposed to an insight that becomes, there's a form of insight. This is a terrible phrase, but I believe I've heard people use it. So there can be insight porn, which is sort of the enjoyment of insight, right? But you're just enjoying insight. It's not sending you out. It's not, you're not going anywhere, right? They can feel similar. The difference is that when you have an apprehension, such as in fiction, you now have to do the work. It sends you out. Come and see and go. There's an evangelicism. There's an evangelical kind of element to it, if you will. It's the switching. You have received, and now you got to figure out how to send that. And what you received is not necessarily like the mode in which you received
it's not the same mode as you're going to be communicating through like the written word.
It is a reason for me why there is a danger to do something like philosophy unless you do also creativity, like writing. Actually, all intellectualism has a danger if it is separated from creation, because then it can just be the enjoyment of learning, which actually can just be a glass bead game in that Herman Hesse sense, as opposed to actually sending out. So for me, philosophy and art always have to go together. If they don't go together, there can be various problems that can arise. And I believe it was Mr. Limburg at the store who would talk about insight porn. And certainly the philosopher who doesn't engage in creativity can be more prone to that mistake, although all of us can do it, because nobody is perfect. So I think it's a very good point you're making. And I caught you right when you stopped the guy. I timed it perfect, didn't I?
Well, I saw my moment and swapped out my glass. It's not quite 5 o'clock yet here, so I can't shift to the heavy stuff yet.
Right.
Okay, well, let's shift to like some of your comments on the actual stories. And looking at the chat here, it seems like the guys are longing for some grit, some grappling. So if you have observations about direction these stories took, or really just love to hear like what stood out to you.
The world, and please tell everyone in the chat I said hello. I'm always bad at the chat during live, so please, everyone, thank you for being here. Wonderful to have you.
Okay. Nick from the last stream asked you to punch him.
So right there. So pound. Oh, that's more like pound it or something.
We're not that far into the cyberpunk future yet. We can't get the fist to go through the screen. We're working on it.
Absolutely. Well, so a few comments. So there's two ways to go about a kind of critique that I'll throw out there for you, Matt. So there's one talking about, there's always this fine tension in feedback where anyone who is a writer who's honest, they want to be told what to do. And they want that negativity, but they also want that positivity, and they're looking for the right way to go about it, right? And so the main thing that I want to say is to start. I think fiction is really important work, and it really matters. And I know that y'all are talking about doing the Zine, every 3 months, doing it continually. What I would want to see is a world. Apparently, it used to be that when Dickens' books would come on the ship into the harbor, they'd be going nuts, right? They would be on the ports of wanting it because they wanted to know what would come next. Because as we know, with Dickens, Dostoevsky, all these people, it was installments. Like one of the reasons the books are so long is because it would be almost more like periodicals or magazines or something.
It's half book, half what we understand is like syndicated television today.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And so people are literally just longing in order to get these works. That's what I would like to see this be. I would like people to go every 3 months. Oh my gosh, we can't wait. Because when we read that work, it does something that nothing else does, right? And I do think printing presses, literature, these things have all, whether it be Eliot, whether it be Virginia Woolf, the Criterion, these things have been at the center of culture making. And I think a lot of the work that's most important today is in the realm of culture making. So I think it really, really matters. So for me, one, the creativity of the premise is very interesting. Second, I really like how all of the stories, there's an anthological feeling to them, where they're all taking place in the same world, but there's also difference, and they're different stories, and there's kind of crossover. I think that's really important. I like also how there are different authors. Actually, in my version of it, it doesn't tell me who wrote what.
That hasn't been like formally announced yet.
I kind of like that. I find that really, really interesting and enjoyable. I know the names are in the back, but I thought that was kind of an interesting effect because it actually kind of made it feel like it could possibly be a novel because maybe it is all the same person, right? It kind of became a whole. So that was just an interesting experience that I had. I think also too, I really enjoyed. So as one example, so I mentioned the Horse of Heaven, how I liked the reading of the text on that one and how it kind of had the experience of the words. That was really wonderful. I enjoyed the opening of the Cyberpunk Advent, how that set the stage really lovely and kind of worked in from there. I like Kale's Tale. I thought the writing in Kale's, I thought this was written lovely. The writing in Kale's Tale was lovely, how it went along. I also enjoyed Taleb's Dog Walk. This one was nice and how it ended as well, where it's like you're putting me into slavery. I thought that was quite good. I was quite engrossed in that story, so that it pulled me along because I wanted to know what would happen. Those are some larger feelings that I had about the work. Now, if I were to give what I would say is the main critique that for me, so I basically, like I mentioned, I wrote, continually, for like 20 or so years. And there was this certain point where there was just something wrong with Esperanza. I wrote it 42 times, rewrote it. And there was something that was just not clicking, that was just not connecting, that readers were not having the emotional experience, or heroes, or turn the world, or so on and so forth. And the main thing that was kind of the wake up was a friend came over, Sarah Wade, and she mentioned this book she had read by Robert Olin Butler, From Where Dreams Come. This is by far, I've read many books on creative writing. None of them are even close to this work in its grandeur. I cannot suggest it enough. And the key to this book is that it is getting into something that is often overlooked in creative writing, and that not a single creative writing professor I had ever heard talked about, nor anyone ever talked about. And it was about the writing of the sentences themselves, and how the sentences themselves in creative writing are different from sentences in anything else. And there are three things generally that a creative writing sentence needs to do. It needs to be grammatically correct, obviously. It needs to be correct in the sense of I received the information. Okay, so I know what is being said. So turns out there's a third one that I didn't know about, and that was really a very big deal for me to grasp. And that is, the third one is the emotional experience of the work that has a cinematic feel. So, when you're reading a work and you have a movie playing in your head, right?
Yeah.
Why is it that sometimes there's a movie in your head and not other times? Is it random? Because there are some books you've read where you're just seeing everything happen in front of you, but then there are other ones where you don't. And the question becomes, why? Why is that? Because to the degree that you see the story in your head as you're reading it, is to the degree you become emotionally invested into it. And the work is no longer information you're receiving, but it becomes an emotional experience that you're undergoing. And in that way, you begin to forget that you're reading. So, for example, if I were to pick one sentence, just like, let's look at the sentence here. Ibram chuckled a little too hard in response, for example. I'm just going to take that one. I could have picked other sentences. Yeah. So, the sentence, Ibram chuckled a little too hard in response. What Butler would say is it's an abstraction. Because the reason why it's an abstraction is because even though I know what it means that Ibram chuckled a little too hard in response, I don't see Ibram chuckling a little too hard in response. So, for example, what does chuckle look like? So when someone chuckles, you would say Ibram's chest moved, Ibram's chest moved, or his coat ruffled as he responded, right? Like, what does it look like when someone chuckles, right? Because the thing that Butler made me realize is that chuckling is actually an abstraction. I don't see chuckling. I see a body moving. I see someone breathing differently. I see how their face changes. I see how their cheeks move, right? And so what ends up happening, like, as an example that Butler gives, and it kind of blew my mind when I was like, oh my gosh.
I mean, being blown right now. Keep going. No, I'm just saying, like, my mind is being blown, kind of intaking this right now. Keep going.
So in all honesty, after I read Butler's book, it ruined me. But it ruined me in a way that I'm extremely grateful for, because it actually helped me know what I needed to do in a freaking fiction sentence. And I never knew before that, because what tends to do is the sentence. And again, I'm just picking this sentence. I could pick this sentence. A warm hand rested on Ismael's shoulder. the information, the sentence is grammatically correct, right? It is informationally correct. You know what happens. A warm hand rested on the shoulder, okay? But is it an emotional experience? No, because what happens, it's more like warm. You see the fingertips caressed his shoulder before the palm stretched around the blade and created warmth. See, which of these two expressions are you more likely to see the movie in your head? A warm hand rested on Ismail's shoulder, or the fingers touched fingers touched. And this is where it gets hard. Like once you do this, you have to really think. Oh my gosh, you have to think in order to make these sentences. Yeah. It's so hard. And this is so hard to do, but it's way more impactful. So if you have the sentence, the fingers touched the skin of the shoulder blade and ran down and cupped the shoulder, and I felt warmth. Like you could follow that. Your mind had time to kind of get into the scene, right? And then after that, I would say, Isma, you've done a very good job. Like take that dialogue. That dialogue, after the really feeling the hand on the shoulder or seeing it, that dialogue hits you differently, doesn't it? Versus if I say a warm hand rested on Ismail's shoulder, Isma, you've done a very good job, right? Now it just feels like information. Okay, I know what's happening in the story, right? But when I describe the fingertips going down the shoulder and the palm cupping my shoulder blade, and then you say, Isma, you've done a very good job. There's a different hit to it, right? So ultimately what Butler was getting at, and this would be in all honesty, so what you have to do in a fiction sentence, it's the problem of the map is the territory problem, which of course is something I talk about all the time, which is if a map works because it's wrong, right?
Yes.
That's why it works.
1000%.
These words are not experiences. They're black marks on paper. So they're maps, right? So it's because they are wrong in that sense. The word what? Yeah, that's right. The map's not the territory. Exactly. Right? So the word warm is never the experience of warmth, right? Your job as a fiction writer is to use words in such a way that feels like the territory. That's what you're trying to do when you write fiction. And I hope my internet's not dying out here in the garage. It probably, nope, there you are. So
you're great.
The word warm is not okay, excellent. The word warm is not the experience of warmth. I need to write the sentence though in such a way where the map helps me feel the territory. It helps me navigate the territory, where the word warmth helps me feel warmth, which of course you say that's freaking impossible. Yeah. So, fiction writing is crazy. Welcome to fiction. This is why fiction writing is nuts because also, so here's the problem. If the map is too much like the territory, if it's too perfect, it's useless. But if it's not enough like the territory, it's too wrong, right?
Yes.
So you have to judge when it's abstract enough to be useful, but not so abstract that I can't have an emotional experience. Do you see what I'm saying? Every sentence you write in fiction, you're making a judgment on when it's abstract enough to be useful, because, in order to be a word on paper that I can understand, but not so abstract that I can't have the emotional experience or the movie playing in my head as I am reading it. So it's like a Socratic, how in Socrates, and I'll stop. How in Socrates you say, I'm having a good day. And he's like, what do you mean by good? And you say, well, I mean, it's pleasurable. Oh, are you saying good and pleasurable? So you're doing this breaking down, this dialectical back and forth. When you write a sentence, you're doing a Socratic dialogue on detail to find the biofit, the fit between abstraction and experience, and you're trying to make that work in the writing. So as an example,
just want to say, and just like with Socratic questioning, there comes a point where asking the question makes you the pestering 2-year-old, and so you need to stop before, you can tear everything down to death.
Exactly right. And so that's why fiction writing. So here's the issue. That's why fiction writing is an art. Like you're tasting the recipe like the chef, and you're saying a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There you go. And maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's right. That's where you need the other to read it, right? But the point is, most of the time people writing fiction don't even realize they need to worry about that. They just write to make sure the information is conveyed and that the grammar is correct, but they are not paying attention to the emotional flow of the cinema. So let me give an example here. Flacco, if I'm pronouncing that, forgive me. Flacco walked down the steps of the old stoop and knocked at the red metal door 3 times fast and then twice slow. So I've got the information. I know what's happening in the story. But here's the issue. I was told and knocked at the red metal door, and then I found out it was 3 times fast and then twice slow. So I know he knocked, and I have to imagine back on the previous sentence what the word knocked meant. You see what I'm saying? So instead, what I would you could write is Flacco walked down the steps of the old stoop to the red metal door and knocked 3 times fast and then twice slow. Notice there's no brain having to jump back to understand what the word knocked meant. And it's like water running down a hill continually, because I see the character walking down the step of the old stoop to a red metal door and knocking 3 times fast and then twice slow. You see how it just kind of goes, right? And also, too, I don't in real life knock and then think about how I knock 3 times fast. I knock 3 times fast and twice slow at the same time. You see? So the key is you go back when you're writing, and I'll pause before just to make more. I'm happy to make more examples because this goes into dialogue and things like that. Is that the key? It's a way to make what you're also doing here is making you know how at the beginning we talked about how the sentences become invisible to you, right?
Yes.
This is all creating a tension that makes the sentences other to you. They become alien because they have to do something impossible. And that creates a tension that makes it easier to see the sentences and to judge them and to discern what's going on. Because your standard becomes, does the sentence continually make the image without any breakup of walking down the old stoop and then to a red metal door and knocking 3 times fast and then twice slow? That is actually how it would be like in sensual experience. If I myself, Daniel Garner, were to walk down the steps of the old stoop and then also hear critically, I am told that I knocked and then told there's a red metal door. First in experience, I would experience the red metal door and then knock. So the word knock should come after the red metal door because that's what it's like in experience. Like I experience the door and then I knock on it, if that makes sense. So that becomes the ordering of the details in the fiction sentence so that it is a continual sensual experience, so that as I'm reading it, I'm reading black marks on white paper, but I'm lost in an emotional continual experience of the work. So then what you do is when you're writing the literal sentences in fiction itself, it's correct, grammatical, and it's maintaining the movie in the head. And every sentence has to do all 3 at all times. And you have to judge and discern when you're succeeding at that. And it will drive you crazy, but it's the work worth doing because it creates a unique, emotional, and powerful experience that only literature can do.
That's so good. Have you read the book? I forget the author, but it's called like What We See When We Read. Have you heard of this?
I have not. Ooh.
It's by, I think, the typesetter at Alfred. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is, again, like exactly what we were talking about. Like, how do words perform the magic trick of conjuring images in their head? It starts off with a question like, "What color are?" I think it's Anna Karenina's eyes. He asked the question, and the thing is, you don't like in the book itself. You do not learn they are brown until like page 80. Did you walk around for those first 80 pages with empty eyelids because you were not provided the color?
Right.
When you were provided that information. So that's the other thing he talks about is just this sort of one of the things that fiction allows you to do is deal with intangible images that you are able to live with the fact that they are not totally defined. And again, I imagine also this has to do with like if you have enough skill as an artist, you're not doing things that are constantly creating cross signals. But that's the sort of thing that book is all about. It's about how the text like translates to the imagery in the head.
I think that is an example of what the medium of writing can do that, say, a movie cannot do. So the writer, so let me put it this way. The writer should be incredibly intentional. Like the writer should be aware when the reader does not have the description to see this or that and actually use that for the sake of the story. Like if there is in a sense, blank canvas that is in the work that the reader then has to fill with their imagination, you as the writer need to be completely aware and in control of where those blank canvases are, that you don't just stumble them into. Otherwise, the blank canvases will not serve the emotional experience or the work. They will be random.
Mhm.
And if they're random, then it's collecting, not gathering. So then it can't have an experience that comes forth. But that, as a very critical example, I use that in a story without a title from 2010. The very fact that the reader is not told what a particular character looks like, and thus I assume that they're going to see the character as a certain look, is actually very intentional for the twist. Because then it turns out, no, they actually were never told what that character looks like, and it's shocking. Because then you realize that and you retrospectively go, oh my gosh, and bam. So you can use that for powerful twists, in my opinion. You can use that for powerful experiences. It's one of the tools in the toolkit that's very important.
Yes, yeah. Think of an example somewhat recently where it was a I think they withheld the race for like a book and a half or something like that. It was a very intentional like reveal. And like, wait a second. And so in that case, it was intentionally, well, I mean, unless you're, I don't know, like super woke and only see clear people that
Sure.
It was supposed to be this created this disjunction of like, oh, I've completely like mispictured this person for the last 300 pages.
Right.
And again,
yeah, that would be a perfect example.
Something that you're trying to do, sure.
Yep. Absolutely. That'd be a perfect example.
I like appreciating so much how much you're bringing the dimension of just the somatic, the body to the art of writing, which really like initially feels very abstract, very disembodied. Like for me personally, one of my like particular like fun genres of choice, I like reading a lot of like horror fiction.
Nice.
And part of the reason is because it does like, you know, it traffics in that like translating the marks on a page into something very specific that your body is feeling and cannot not feel if they do it at all skillfully.
Absolutely. Well, not to jump in, but you know, as an example, to that, like you want to bring experiences of the body as much as you can into the fiction, right? As much as you can. And often expressions of the body communicate the same information as another sentence. So for example, if I were to take this one, what was the name of the job site again? Talib wondered to himself, La Familia or something, right? So what if I were to write instead, what was the name of the job site again? Talib rubbed his brow, La Familia or something, right? So when somebody wonders, what do? They tend to go like this, right? So, you know, instead, so by showing a bodily motion, Talib rubbed his brow, I'm giving you the information of wondering to himself, but giving you something to see at the same time, right? And so often, like a lot of what Butler is putting forth is things, visual things you can see that replace phrases like Talib wondered to himself or Talib said or something like that, right? Or you're gonna have to have some degree of that because you're bringing the body into the experience. And so when you read that, you actually subconsciously feel yourself rubbing your brow. You have remembrance of that feeling. So you bring an emotion into the reading of it. And you know, and you remember what it's like to be wondering something to yourself, right? Or trying to figure something out. So then you emotionally connect with Talib. Like you're making that connection with the character. Yeah. So as many images of the body doing something in the work can be really, 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 really powerful.
That's good. I don't know, a jumping off point from there directly, other than this is like, especially if this is a project we plan on keep doing. I'm just already like starting to think like this is already changing the way I'm going to be like attending to the world if I keep up this practice. It's just, there's so much more to pay attention to. There's so much more to notice.
For me, what I am seeing in this Zine, and I'm sorry, I sometimes will interrupt. I'm so sorry. What I'm seeing in this Zine is the creative capacity. I'm seeing the world building. I'm seeing a wrestling with the big ideas. I'm seeing people trying to create fiction that freaking matters. It's not just an expression of personal feelings. Like a lot of fiction falls into the trap of basically being a confessional or a diary or something like that. That has a place, but it shouldn't be the only place you can go when you read fiction in a bookstore, dang it. And that's where we are now. Like a lot of the fiction does not have what I call ontological stakes. It is not wrestling with the deepest problems that are turning people into hikikomori. This Zine showcases what for me are the key concerns that have that if fiction writers don't have, I do question if they should be doing fiction, because they're not doing work. They're doing work without that. You tend to be doing work that is too individualistic and too egocentric. Now, I'd have to justify that, and I'm not saying in every case, but one of the reasons why, you know, a lot of the Japanese works can be so appealing is because there's a real deep sense of future, world, and stakes to it, right? It's not just a personal memoir, which has a role, but if the personal memoir is not serving a cosmic vision or a world vision, it will become egoic and function individualistically in a manner that will probably serve economic interests in a manner that are not inherently bad, but could be problematically overfit for all areas of life. Now, that was very, very loaded. But the point I want to say is that for me, what I see in this Zine are the concerns that fiction writers ought to have if they're going to do fiction. The thing that, what I'm getting at is, I wrote for so many years without knowing what a freaking fiction sentence should do. I wasted so much time. And felt lost because the sentences were invisible. So one of the reasons I'm bringing up Butler to you now is because I don't want that to happen to anyone ever again. And especially people, because if y'all going to do this every 3 months, then y'all can do that. Y'all can do that with stakes and make those emotional impacts. And again, it changes how you write. When you really look at every single sentence and go, I need to make sure this sentence keeps the movie playing in my head. It gives you a standard of where to put a comma, when to describe the door versus describing knocking. Okay, in real life, I experienced the door before I knock on it. So I should say walk to the red door and knocked versus knocked on the red door. You can say, but what does it matter? The information's the same because the order of the words do not align with the lived experience of knocking on a door. Therefore, the sentence is less likely to create the movie in your head and the emotional experience that will pull the reader in. You see what I'm saying? So that becomes your standard of ordering the descriptions in the sentence. And now you have a standard. Now it's not just random because often it just feels random for fiction writers. Here's 2 sentences. John knocked on the red door versus John walked up to the red door and knocked on him. Same, right? They're not the same. Same information, both are grammatically correct, but they are emotionally and as mental images in cinema different. The second sentence is better because in life, you walk up to a door and knock on it versus knock on a red door. And that difference dramatically changes or decreases the likelihood by which the reader is to be emotionally invested in the text and pulled into it. So that becoming your standard of it for me was a big deal. It changed everything for me.
I'm kind of worried as I keep reading in Cyberpunk, just because it's so famously very kind of like jumpy and cutty and very kind of popping back and forth. I feel like you're just going to make this worse for me.
Well, for me, actually, I see so much potential in literary fiction because Butler has not been done with Cyberpunk. Butler and anime stories like Attack on Titan. We have not seen a world where the skill and mastery of literary fiction writing like Butler is putting forth has been matched with the grandeur of story or genre like we see. I think that's an unexplored territory. I think that is the unexplored territory. Putting those 2 things together is a massive deal. The closest is probably McCarthy, who passed with The Road, but that and he had a big impact, right? That kind of what McCarthy is doing, in my opinion, is bringing story, world, and literary fiction mastery together, but it's usually not seen as that's what he's doing. So it's just kind of an ego. Oh, that's just him. No. There's a method to the there is a method to the madness, if you will. There's something that he's doing. He's combining things like apocalyptic fiction, or we'll say in this example, imagine the kind of stories you could tell if you actually immersed yourself in cyberpunk and you employed the writing style that Butler is putting forth. We've not seen that work. And what kind of impact could that have? I think it can have insane impacts on people. And that's why I'm very, very bullish on fiction, the novel, short story, et cetera, so forth, because this has not been done in mass.
Yeah, it's this is exciting. This is inspiring.
I really believe in it. I'm just so glad to see y'all doing it because I believe in this. This is what changes people. They're not changed by ideas. They're changed by ideas used in services of stuff like this. Philosophy matters in so much as it makes possible fiction and art. And art then matters to the degree it opens up philosophical consideration. But you have to have that bothness that are going on.
Yeah.
Or you get freaking heads on sticks, or you get people that have emotions, but they're not able to render them into something they can create with, because they don't have the work of the mind. So putting those things together to me is where there's so much opportunity and possibility.
And I really think, I mean, just speaking from experience here, like books might be uniquely sort of like attuned towards producing that epiphany in a way that others cannot. Like I can think of even for not especially like high quality, like massive high quality literature, I can still think of like 2, 3, 4 books that have rocked my world and completely, and they are a part of me now that I cannot and do not want to excise. Like they have done things to me.
I always find it very interesting how when people talk about things that change their life, it's really often books more than movies or things like that. It's something they read. And of course, religions are often using books. There is something about the book that has a revelatory potential, a human potential that is unique to its medium. But there's a way, I guess what I'm saying is that I want to say there's been a certain level of randomness to it, like a certain kind of not knowing why and what are the conditions that make that happen. The audacious claim that I am making is that if you put together Butler and basically Story, and kind of this level of because often in the writing world, unfortunately, the people who are really good at story because they're so good at story, then they're able to read a sentence. Like you almost get penalized if you're super imaginative, because you can read a sentence like Ibram chuckled a little too hard in response, and you as a creative person are able to see that image because you don't need much to do it, actually, right? But that actually handicaps you, because the people who are reading this that are not so creative can't see it, but you can. So what ends up happening is the people that are super creative and can come up with the awesome stories and the awesome scenarios don't necessarily learn the Butler stuff because they don't need to learn it. Whereas the people who are more like a lot of literary fiction we read in magazines are more interested in the language itself. They're not so good at coming up with the stories. And some of them will even say that story doesn't matter, that writing is not about story. It's about details and the experience. And that's a horrible thing. I am not a fan of that. But there's also... So for me, the potential comes. I guess I'm biased. I see more hope in the people who are super creative and able to come up with story, them learning Butler, than the other people who are more already on the side of the sentence writing learning story. So it's often the story people who are willing to say, okay, I get what a sentence needs to do. That's where I think the Renaissance will come in literature. It will be more from that side. I'm biased, but that's what I think.
I mean, I will say for myself, like I definitely looking at my story, like I hit my skill ceiling and I'm like, there's things I want to do and I don't know how to do it. So I'm just going to have to do this really poorly. And but I see this as like, okay, maybe this is the first of maybe like, I already see what this thing could be with 2 more drafts done. Like that's the sort of thing where it's like, there is something I'm trying to communicate that just got lost before it hit the page. And that's just purely at the level of craft. It's purely at the level of skill. It's just a matter of like, I'm not good enough at this yet in order to do everything that I think could be done with the story I have in my head.
So I will say something very bold, that in my opinion, many writers, there's this feeling of there's something I wanted to do, and I know I didn't do it, and I kind of am grafting at it, and there can be this sense of rewriting to try to grasp it. For me, once I learned Butler and went through the horror of rewriting a story as he said, because it's horrible. Like when you read your like Esperanza, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to somehow make a visual image of Esperanza doing her dance in front of Archangel Cafe in Havana. well, how do I do that? Because I'd have to go to Havana, right? So, you know, I have to see it. So you're studying Google's map, you're looking up every picture you can, and you're like, what color is that? Is that teal? But teal's kind of if I say teal, what does that mean? So how do I describe it? You're like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So it's horrible. It's truly horrible. But here's the key. When you go through that, you actually find the feeling that you've done it or not. Like you actually feel like you know when the work has achieved its goal versus not. Versus the feeling that I personally have had of, you know, it's not there and you just keep rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and you feel like, why isn't it there, dang it? Why isn't it working? You give it to people to read and, you know, a lot of them say it's great, but then you give it to someone new and it didn't do anything for them. And you're like, why didn't it, dang it? Why didn't it? My experience with after going through Butler is there's a wild feeling of being, yes, this actually, yeah, it's done. It's done now. It took me an extra 70 drafts, but it's actually done. That has been for me one of the greatest gifts of what Butler is presenting. This actual feeling of going, it works or not. That's it. Now that doesn't mean obviously everyone will like it, or get all of the details, but what's really weird is, you know, that's different. Like, you know, people liking it is not the standard. It's when you yourself, it meets your own standard. With Butler, you now have a standard. You now have a standard by which to judge when the sentence works or not. So I have found, despite the horror that Butler submits you to, I have found it ultimately extremely liberating. Because then there's a feeling of, yes, Esperanza's done. Started in 2015, went through 72 drafts. It's so crazy. You know, of rewriting that paragraph. But the problem is about 55 of those drafts were wasted because I didn't know Butler. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what the sentences needed to do. So there's a whole lot of freaking wasted time. They made the story better and then also didn't. It started just going in circles. And I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know how to make it not go in circles. And then Butler made a big difference. So obviously I'm just really talking up Robert Olin Butler. I received.
You
no
have
royalties.
Effectively sold the book, sir. Don't worry.
I don't get any
You will get your royalty check. I'm sure.
He doesn't know me. I don't know him. I'm just saying it's a really good book. But Butler, if you see this and you want to mail me a check, I mean, I will take it. It's fine. So, or at least we can get coffee. That would be cool.
Right. He promises not to sell you a spec script the first cup of coffee.
Good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I won't. I promise. So yes, I'm very bullish on literature. Extremely.
It's exciting to find more of y'all out there. So do you have any, I guess, like recommendations in the cyberpunk genre? And it looks like we're switching or going to be shifting over to detective fiction for the next issue. Do you have any specific things kind of like calling out to you like, oh, you should use this as part of your gathering retinue?
That is a great question. Obviously Gibson, Necromancer, obviously, I mean, so much of the manga and different works are so good on this. I will look through my bookshelf and I'm happy to email you back on that kind of thing as I think through it. So yeah, that would be something. I'm a big fan of anime, dang it. I think a lot of the anime stories are some of the best in the world. And they're not always appreciated so much as they should be in the West. But I'll actually write a note here and get back to you on that.
I would relish that, and that'll quickly get passed along to the rest of the bros.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think part of that is just piggybacking off of your love of anime, the fact that it just comes from different cultures, sort of like different symbolic cosmology in a sense? Just the fact that like the soup that those stories are kind of, I mean, again, like at this point, everyone's influenced by America and vice versa, but there is, it is in a sense a certain kind of other, at least initially.
So for me, I think that there's
we're roboting. Hold up.
A story I do something. Okay, I come back. Okay, I'm back. So I think that there's basically been a kind of renaissance going on in Japan, where we'll look back and kind of be like, oh, wow, that was the story renaissance. You know, a lot of the Italian renaissance was, more in painting, architecture. There, of course, was novels, but it was more of an emphasis. Bum, 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 ba, dun, 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 dun. So, I never know when it goes away, if you can still hear me. Oh man, this is great.
I could not. You started talking about the Renaissance.
I did. And somebody doesn't like Japan. I think someone doesn't like Japan who runs Google, SteamYard or something like that. So what I was saying is that I think there's basically been a kind of renaissance going on in Japan in terms of story. And so this is basically why I think, this is my theory. There's a paper in Third Thoughts called The Japanese Renaissance about this that I think is actually very informative for us who want to do fiction or things. So basically what happened in Japan is, for whatever reason, it was acceptable culturally to have animated stories for adults. And the reason why that is a big deal is because the kinds of stories you can tell is liberated. If I have to tell Attack on Titan live action, which they tried, it sucks. And you don't get immersed in it, right? You as the watcher don't get pulled in. It's not a good experience. But the kinds of stories we can tell is directly impacted by the medium we use. Animation in video games unlock story. The kinds of stories you can tell become logistically way easier, and it's unlocked, right? Well, this, of course, will apply to literature because you don't have to hire famous actors or make sets of Gundams or something like that. So you can do it. But the point is this. So here's what happens. Once you then are free to tell whatever story you want, because animation it's less binding than live action, then you come up with, say, Attack on Titan. Now there is a reason to make that music, which is insane. Or there's a reason to make the music for Final Fantasy VI, right? Because video game. Because music tends to, why would you come up with why would Bach come up with, St. Matthew's Passion or something, right? Because of the story, because of the gospel. So story gives you a reason to make music, right? It gives you a reason to do it. So if you unlock story, then it creates reason for painting, for music, for creating other art forms. I think story is like ground zero for unleashing art. So if you unleash storytelling, if you make it easier to tell many different kinds of story, that are basically in animation, your story is only limited by your imagination. Obviously budget because it costs, but it's not limited by the fact that in live action, it's really hard to make a good looking Titan or Gundam, right? So your imagination is more unbound. As imagination is unbound and you make different stories, that creates reason to make music that otherwise would not be made, of which then can inspire other people, and you start getting a positive feedback loop and things like that, right? So I think basically what happened in Japan is because, you have the image scrolls, the visual scroll, there's a culture of the visual. Furthermore, the manga is a big deal because how I was saying earlier, a lot of the people who are really good at story are not so naturally good at the detailed sentence writing in the Butler sense, right? Well, you don't have to freaking worry about that in the manga. You just draw it. So what ends up happening, because what happens if you go to write fiction and you got a good story, but you don't have the training of Butler, well, then you're in trouble. But in Japan, you can just draw it. And a lot of people who are good in story and creativity are quote unquote right brain. Drawing is on right brain, so it better matches together. So they're able to unleash the things better, right? So what we want to do in fiction is unleash story that way, but also master the writing of the sentence so you get both, which has never been done, to make a bold claim. So I think also the key to Japan is in fact also that they unbound their storytelling with animation and video games, and they modernized without religion first. So they were already feeling the nihilism, the huge tensions. They didn't have a big other, and they were having to wrestle with those realities. And also, too, of course, we've got body horror and Akira. That was a genre that comes out of there. Because you're already thinking, well, why does the body, why not change the body genetically, right? So the major questions that the Japanese are asking is what we're asking now in the West, after the loss of religion. This is, of course, vast generalities, but they were asking them early, and then they had the medium of animation to unlock the storytelling by which they could explore them well. So that's what I would say.
Just the fact that all these massive social, cultural, religious issues all take root inside of the body is fascinating in a way I don't fully know what to make sense of. It's the fact that, yeah, what's going on in the world is it will play out in your own body if you. I know if you're not careful. I don't know how fatalistic you can get, but in my darker days, I'm just like, you are a reflection of the world that you're in. But
body is kind of ground zero. Body is kind of ground zero. And one of the reasons why it is so important for the fiction to be written in a way that is reminding of you of the body or bringing you into the body, because the body is kind of ground zero and you want to defend it and you want to save it. And you see, it's so hard because the book is inherently abstract. Like if we go to our Marshall McLuhan and our Walter Ong, the book is what makes possible autonomous rationality, capital fungibility, the signifier. So it's a problem, right? So in a sense, to engage in writing is to toy with the forces that led to all the problems of modernity. So we're trying in fiction to redeem that. Like it's a redemptive act that you're trying to do. And but that is where Butler's a big deal, because that's how you write the sentence in service of the body versus ignoring the body. You're trying to make the sentence serve sensual experience. You're trying to make you have the movie playing in your head. That's honoring the body with the sentence versus making the body irrelevant in the signifier. So that's why the way of writing with the sentence really matters, because it is the very effort of redeeming the written word from how it's been used by modernity to make us fungible. We're trying to redeem the written word to make us more incarnational, to make us more particular in ourselves, and and then thus to see the possible good in abstraction, to see what abstraction can open up, not just to think about abstraction as that which takes us out of our body. No, it can make us feel more deeply if we do it right.
Yes. Oh, it's inspiring.
Well,
especially in the early days of this, it's good to get a little bit of like a push to keep going. I really appreciate it.
Well, again, I think it really matters, and I'm thrilled that you sent me. I'm so sorry, my dear friend. I probably will run in a moment to help tuck in the children and things like that. But I do want to stress, I really think fiction is at ground zero of like the question of if we'll be human or not. Because again, like so much of right now, the temptation is basically be like, technology's bad. Get rid of technology. If we just didn't have technology, we'd be good to go. If we were just more embodied, we'd be good to go. Get rid of the abstractions, get rid of the flaw, get rid of the written word, which becomes for Derrida kind of the signifier, the force that leads to our fungibility, right? So that is what I resist, because I believe abstraction can actually lead to a deeper experience in the body. I believe technology can be used for social coordination, not to replace these things that can function in a manner to hurt our humanity can be used in such a way that makes us more human. And fiction is ground zero for doing that with language. Fiction is ground zero for doing that with the written word. And I strongly believe that one's ability to communicate and speak is also impacted by their work in fiction, and that learning that sentences helps articulation, which then helps communicate with the other person, and you get a positive feedback loop. That fiction, that doing that sort of work really contributes to the communal and the social in very profound ways. And I think basically people need to be doing that work of showing that these things that, they can lead to problems like technology or abstraction, but they don't have to. They can be redeemed. They can be brought into the work of new creation and New Jerusalem. And that each of us should find, in my opinion, a work in one of those areas and give ourselves over to it. And that if we all did that, then I do think we would see what it means to speak of new creation.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well, we'll cap it off here. That way you can go and tuck your lovely kids into bed.
It's been a pleasure. So, well, Matt, thank you so much.
You. You are so welcome. Thank you so much for your time, especially in this like busy season for you. You've been so generous.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for sending it to me, sir. And I'm happy to talk about fiction and this work anytime. Please keep me up to date. I'll do my best to stay up to date. And thank you for the invitation, Matt. I've really enjoyed it.
You are so welcome, sir. Have a wonderful evening.
You too, sir. All the best.